Peter. I will stop sending you voluminous emails with multiple questions, statements, and observations. This is my last one unless you feel compelled to respond. Your understanding of certain aspects of space really does need some revision before you speak to children about the subject. They will consider you to be an authority who knows it all. How can any child really evaluate what you are saying? They can't. They must rely on your honesty and integrity. Please do not teach your prejudices. Children deserve so much more from you. Here are some questions you might like to ask them. 1. What is the solar constant? 2. What is the temperature of space? 3. How fast is escape velocity? 4. Why did all Apollo craft take 72 hours to reach the moon? And 5. Have you ever seen or used photographic film? Should you feel up to a debate with me at your local astronomy club, I will be there ready with my evidence. Then you can attempt to shoot me down and make an example of me in front of all of your knowledgeable audience. 40 minutes each, and then a Q&A session. NASA. I use the title as a generic term for the coordinating body responsible for paying their contractors, who are also responsible to the U.S. Congress for the accounting of the budget they are located. They take the glory when they have success, but also when things go wrong, they blame the investigations. The term, never a straight answer, was first used by the New York Times in 1968 to describe the frustration they felt in the apparent inability of James Webb, then head of NASA, to answer their questions without being evasive. I use the term more as a description of how hard it is to get answers from NASA, which it is. I asked the manufacturers of the Apollo spacesuits a question about their ability to protect astronauts from radiation. They referred me to NASA. Still no answer. You have also mentioned the Van Allen radiation belts, named after Professor James Van Allen at Iowa University, which surrounds the Earth. He placed a Geiger counter in Explorer 1, and when that was overwhelmed by the levels of radiation, another stronger one in Explorer 4. His analysis was simple. Space is radioactive. There are two belts, inner and outer. The inner belt starts at 600 miles above the Earth's surface and extends out to about 7,500 miles. The South Atlantic anomaly can also be as low as 100 miles from the surface, into which the ISS occasionally orbits. The outer belts start at just over 8,000 miles and extend to 37,300 miles. Beyond that, it's radiation all the way to the moon and beyond, GCRs and SPEs. The VABs surround Earth like a donut with a radiation-free area at both poles. The reason I said a polar orbit was allegedly used is taken from an explanation offered by several NASA supporters to deflect attention from their increasing number of questions as to how the launch from Florida avoided the radiation belts. As that never happened, there are still many questions to be addressed about how radiation causes so little harm to the Apollo astronauts. This will be the showstopper of human space travel when new attempts are made to return to the moon. NASA now say that one of the two major problems still to be overcome, the other being propulsion. But they sent 24 astronauts all the way to the moon and back over 50 years ago. How? There was a powerful solar flare on 4th August 1972, just after Apollo 16 and before Apollo 17. If that had hit the Apollo craft in space, the astronauts would have been, at the very least, placed in severe danger of serious injury. No one reported it or knows anything about it until it had been recorded at the time it hit. As for the 1869 Carrington event, that was fortunately not as destructive as it would have been. Now, electricity is in much more widespread use. A solar event in 1989 took out much of the grid in eastern North America. I attended a talk given by a scientist from the Harwell Laboratories near Oxford. She was speaking about the radiation and the problems faced by the astronauts traveling into space. A strong case was made about how hard it was proving to protect astronauts from being subjected to the very unpleasant effects of radiation. I asked her how the Apollo astronauts managed to survive apparently unscathed. Her reply was, "The luck of Apollo." That is really not good enough, especially from someone supposedly conversant with the subject. Some friends and I conducted an experiment recently to establish just how photographic film behaves when subjected to quite low level of vacuum, much lower than the levels at the moon. The film was damaged and its color balance seriously compromised to the extent that the picture taken after removing the film from the vacuum chamber were quite obviously wrong. So how were all of these iconic pictures allegedly taken on the moon? They could not have been. They were all taken here on the Earth. Please prove me wrong. Best wishes, Marcus. Marcus, I don't need to prove to you that I am qualified to teach astronomy. You really do have a cheek. I have been lecturing part-time since 1982 and full-time since 1994. Once again, I have to explain that nobody has to take my word for anything. It can all be verified easily. Science teachers, astronomers, mathematicians, and yes, even astronauts have been in my audience, no problems or objections. I will not change my style or content. Who are you to challenge it? You have never seen a single lecture of mine, and yet you question my knowledge? If I don't know something, I find out and not make it up, unlike yourself. If you knew anything about physics, you wouldn't even mention such daft questions such as, what is the temperature of space? You don't even give a distance from the sun or where. Temperature is measured by an average speed of molecules in a given substance. As you are referring to the temperature of space, then it can't be measured in a perfect vacuum. There is no molecules to measure by. Only the temperature of a given substance, color, and density in sunlight as defined distance angle can be measured. It can also be influenced by other forces such as magnetism. The sun's surface is 6,000 C, but the atmosphere thousands of miles above is 1 million C. This is due to combining energy from infrared to powerful magnetic fields. If the sun was cold, the corona would still remain close to 1 million degrees, two forces to excite molecules and raise temperature. Then nothing, as there are no molecules until you reach a something like the moon or Earth's atmosphere. Anyone can tell you you have no science background as you aren't specific with your questions and ask about the basic points that have been known for centuries if you took the trouble to learn. You have never mentioned where you have learned physics. I have asked. I already know the answer. I didn't learn it anywhere. It's all obvious. Even the northern lights is thousands of degrees, and yet you could climb into a spacecraft, float out of the ISS into the aurora, and feel no difference whatsoever. Satellites pass through it constantly and don't melt. The molecules are so rarefield, it won't melt the suit or anything. The universe is more complex than using what you think is obvious, and yet you question my knowledge? All these real facts can be confirmed by thousands of real scientists. Who is going to agree with you with command modules getting back home even without a main engine, etc.? How fast is the escape velocity? Of what? The Earth, Moon, Sun, our galaxy? You never define anything. You are constantly vague to say the least. Stop wasting my time. I have mentioned before that I can't justify my time on you in particular. You have shown your guesswork and avoided my previous response. You don't answer my simple questions, so why should I answer yours? There is no point in answering every tiny petty problem you have, as you will just mention other rubbish as you already predictably have, rather than admitting that you have made it all up just like your command module alone in orbit. You showed no apology for inventing complete nonsense that you cannot get out of. It is already quoted in the latest version of my book, Thanks for the Laugh. I will not invite you to our society, as each speaker has to prove their knowledge with their field first. You haven't. We never give anyone time on our stage who just goes around making stuff up. You are wasting your life on this. Debunking this is child's play. Is that so, Mr. Bassett? Can you provide any explanation for this picture, especially the lighting and the position of the astronaut in the exit hatch? Thank you. Best wishes, Marcus. Marcus, explanation of what exactly? The light is secondary from the surface. His suit is white with an albedo of over 90%. What about his position? He can't come out sideways. There's nothing wrong with this picture. Pete. And now, a few words from Marcus Allen and Scott Henderson regarding this famous picture.
So let's just have a look at this picture again, shall we? Let's just indicate a few points on it which may be of interest. This is a picture taken allegedly by Neil Armstrong, who's standing on the ground, having been first out, taking photograph of allegedly Buzz Aldrin here, climbing out of the lunar lander, the Eagle, here. It's about 10 foot off the ground. Look at the position that Buzz Aldrin is in. He's kneeling on the ground and his backpack here is virtually up against the hatch entrance. You can see inside. So one question is, where did all this light come from to illuminate him so clearly, to illuminate the underside of the hatch, when we know that the whole side of the lander is in shadow? Because we know which side the sun is coming from. The sun is behind the lander. So this is all in shadow. So the question is, where did this level of light come from when the directly illuminated surface of the moon over here on the left is not overexposed? And the film used is a color film. You can tell, there's the American flag. The colors are quite accurate. They were using Kodak Ektachrome reversal film as a transparency material. If this is not overexposed, that would indicate that this level of light here is pretty well close to the amount of illumination on the surface. So where's this light coming from? Ah, I hear you say, it's the reflective properties of the lunar surface. Well, the lunar surface is certainly reflective, because you look out the window and you can see the full moon. It's reflecting light. It's coming from the sun. But the amount of light being reflected is 8% of the amount hitting it. So there's 100% of the light hitting the surface. 8% of that is reflected. That is not enough light to illuminate something in complete darkness, in total shadow, as we have here. So there has to be additional light. And you would say it's reflection off the lunar surface. I say that's not sufficient. 8% is not enough to illuminate it to this degree. If this was exposed correctly, which it is, and if Buzz Aldrin, who's still inside the lander, is illuminated, so you can see what he's looked like, his backpack is illuminated, his backside is, and I think, hang on a minute, there's too much light, so where's it coming from? It's not the reflection off the lunar surface, because behind the lander here is 70 foot of shadow. There's a lot of light here on the right here, there's a lot of light here. There'll be some light which is direct sunlight. And then we come on to the more mysterious part of it, which is the ladder. You'll notice that the ladder is attached to the support. And it's attached quite securely. Obviously, you don't want the ladder to fall off when anybody's getting down it. There's at least 2 foot between the level here and the top of the ladder. The top of the ladder is pretty well underneath this porch area here. But there's a big obstruction on the ladder in the middle of it, on the top rung, on the second rung, and the third rung. The rung is clear. The support is very nearly up to it. So what you've got is major obstructions on the ladder. And you're saying that you can see these. I'm saying you can't. Because when you did your little film of walking down the ladder blindfold, very clever, very, very impressive, but you weren't wearing a full face crash helmet, heavy duty gardening gloves, and Wellington boots, because that would be a more realistic depiction of what the astronauts were wearing. Helmet, gloves, boots. Being blindfold really has very little to do with it, because unless you get your foot onto this rung here at the top, and on the second rung here, and the third rung here, you're going to fall off. And as we know, the first thing you're taught when you go mountaineering is always maintain 3 points of contact at all times. 2 hands, 1 foot, 2 feet, 1 hand. As we know from the famous photograph of Buzz Aldrin at the top of the ladder, he's got his left foot stuck out at a ridiculously stupid angle, and his right foot is not even touching the rung of the ladder. He's only got 2 points of contact. That's extremely dangerous in a situation that he's never been in before. He may have practiced it, but when he came to do it for real, we're told, he larked about like it was another practice session, which it almost certainly was. So you've got all this bit here on the ladder obstructing your feet, and if you're wearing heavy-duty space boots with overshoes, that's the equivalent of gum boots, Wellington boots, gardening boots, call them what you like. Those are quite wide, and you've got to get them on the rung, or you fall off. So I would say that there is a great deal wrong, which if you look closely, you'll see in this picture. Let's just have a close look at Aldrin in the entrance to the Eagle. You can see the top of his backpack. You can see the internal part of the Eagle, the lunar lander. You can also see how close he is to this top. He's bending forward slightly, but not very far. Now let's have a look at what's inside the Eagle at this point. Right, inside the lunar lander is this. That's the hatchway that we've just seen the outside of. It's hinged looking at it on the right-hand side, so it opens to the right. And Buzz Aldrin is kneeling in this entrance. Look what's above him. The control panels, which were used in this side by Neil Armstrong to land the craft. There's the window he looked out of. There's the window through which Buzz Aldrin allegedly looked out of. These are the controls to land the craft as Armstrong did manually. He overrode the 1202 alarm, which was basically telling them that the radar was picking up too much information and was suggesting an abort. They overrode that. So here we have the control panels above the doorway. How far out do these control panels stick? And if you were kneeling in this doorway, which Buzz Aldrin was allegedly doing, he was kneeling here, he would be leaning much further forward because his PLSS backpack, portable life support system, everything that he needed to keep himself alive on the lunar surface, we're told, is quite a big piece of kit. If it's going to be large enough for him to stand in the doorway of the lunar lander as he is standing here in the doorway of the lunar lander, he should be leaning forward much more than he is. So what we've got here is Buzz Aldrin standing in this doorway with the control panel directly above him. Where is the control panel here? He doesn't appear to be obstructed in any way by something which will stick out above the doorway. Here's the doorway, above the doorway, probably 10, 12 inches, 25 centimeters in new money. These are not removable. This central panel is not removable because it contains the computer here that they had the 1202 alarm showing up on. This is not removable. So where is it here? It's not visible. It's not indicating any obstruction. So my conclusion is that this whole image, this whole lander, was part of the simulation exercise when he was doing his training. And it was just used to illustrate what it would be like when photographed from the lunar surface. But they made several mistakes. There's too much light here. There's no control panel inside here. And the amount of light falling on the backpack and the spacesuit here, even though they're bright, maybe 90% albedo, reflection, you've still got to get the light there to reflect off it. And as I've said, the amount of light falling directly onto the lunar surface is much greater than would be recorded here if this was truly in shadow on the film used Kodak Ektachrome. It's a very good camera. I'm not disputing the quality of the camera, the Hasselblad camera. What I am disputing is the ability to get the film to record different areas. This is film, this is not digital. Digital will record that sort of information separately. A film camera won't.
That's a beautiful explanation on how that is just a mock-up prop on that they're using to practice with, because all they really needed was just the entrance and the staircase down to do the filming. But if This is the actual photograph that they claim to be on the lunar surface. And there's no control panel there. The control panel runs an engine, so there'd be no blast crater. Fire the engine because you don't have a control panel. So then the mock-up prop, of course, probably has nothing inside it. It wouldn't need an engine. It wouldn't need anything in there except the equipment to shoot the film out the windows.
Yeah, that's basically all you'd need. Notice that there is no picture in the window. If this was really on the moon, which it isn't, this is a mock-up.
Oh, that one's a museum piece.
Yeah, this is in a museum, so you're going to get all the correct information about what is inside it. And there's a problem, because what's inside the real lander, as designed and built by the people who were responsible for it, this is not a real lander. This is a mock-up.
Absolutely. If this is a mock-up, so are all the other props that they were using. And of course, those have been demonstrated over and over and over again, and people simply deny it. But if you do research and you study it and you have an open mind and look at this properly, this is what you come up with. This is true research. There's no sense parroting other people's work.
It's a matter of studying the evidence, not guessing anything, studying the evidence and drawing conclusions. Right. They may be right, they may be wrong. If they're wrong, tell me.
The image isn't skewed by JPEG compression or any other excuses they have. These are the official documents from and photographs from NASA. Nobody's disputing that, even though they'd like to. These kind of results are from studying these and having an open mind and the ability to look at what is real and what isn't.
It's using real science. This is what we're doing here. This is real science. This is looking at a picture, drawing conclusions from it, checking out the details. If it's right, great. If it's not right, look again, get more information, come to the correct conclusion. These are mock-up sets.
The one image alone, one photograph alone is definitive proof. If you don't have a control panel inside that thing there, it can't fly, it can't do anything.
It can't be controlled.
It's built so flimsy, they're lucky they could keep it standing there.
Yeah, so that control panel, especially this center part here, would be definitely obstructing whoever was trying to stand up like that.
That PLS pack is on a very extreme angle up, and that's about halfway up the PLS and OPS pack itself.
Yeah.
So there's quite a bit standing up there, and that control panel sitting there is just very directly above. They were bringing it down. It's less than half an inch above the door.
Exactly, because space was at a premium.
That's right.
Now, this door is about 32 inches square.
Yes.
Now, if you then work out the pressure that is on that door, because inside this lander here, inside the Eagle, the Ascent, that's where the astronauts were. Let's say this is 900 square inches, 30 by 30 square inches. £5 per square inch is the internal pressure, we're told, inside the lander. £5 per square inch times 900 is nearly 2 tons of pressure on this one panel. Is it strong enough to withstand that?
That's not even including the vacuum differential.
Exactly, right. So there are so many anomalies within the story that everybody believes is correct because NASA told them it's correct. And I think I've already explained where the term "never a straight answer" comes from. Now, there's one other little piece of information we need to look at. Bear in mind this highly illuminated doorway, which I've said is on the shadow side of the lunar lander. Let's have a look at a more recent example of how that was, or recreated, I should say. This is still taken from the NVIDIA. NVIDIA is a very well-known, well-established company making computer chips, gaming chips. And about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I was invited to take part in the new development of the Maxwell GPU. I was quite keen to take part. I thought it would be a good time to be able to examine what was going on. When I found I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, I declined their invitation. But this is the result of that program. It's on the internet, it can be quite easily seen. What they were trying to demonstrate was that their new Maxwell GPU could recreate this famous photograph. There's the sun shining, there's the eagle, there's Buzz Aldrin a little bit further down the ladder, and he seems to be well illuminated. The surface is not overexposed, as we said before, but having looked at the previous picture of the hatchway, look at how dark the NVIDIA creation made the hatchway. You can hardly see any detail in it at all. It's as if they didn't bother. So what you've got here is just a bit of sort of extra bit. Notice these bits here are as on the original photographs. There's the window. Quite where the light's coming from to illuminate the S-band antenna, I don't know, but it is. We're told it's the illumination off the lunar surface, off here. But in the original Apollo photograph, you get a far greater illumination inside the hatchway. The NVIDIA film managed to omit that, as if their software wasn't capable of doing it. And many people have tried to buy the chips that they were making, claiming that this was what you could do with it, and found they couldn't. And Jarrah White, whose very interesting films, claimed that the RGB levels on the surface gave a reflectivity of over 30%. Well, we know that the reflectivity of the lunar surface is 8%, the same as a tarmac road surface. And photographers don't use tarmac road surface as illumination on their photographs. And if you then say that, well, this is all coming from Neil Armstrong, or the photographer, whoever it was, standing in his white spacesuit, it's not enough of him. He's standing at right angles to the sun. We can see the sun over there. Neil Armstrong will be standing in sunlight, but he's standing at right angles to it. Let's say he's 6 foot tall, 2 foot wide, that's 2 square meters of reflection. I doubt that's enough to create this amount of light at that distance and for it to be recorded on the Kodak Ektachrome film that was being used.
This particular example, to me, when I look at it, it's very poor reproduction. It's not even as good as a 50-year-old photocopier. The reflective light in this, I think they were just specifying to try and push a little more light onto it. The exhaust bell housing is just blacked right out. It has no color at all, which even the original photograph has color to it.
Yeah, it does.
They weren't trying very hard. They were just focused on one thing.
Yeah, they were trying to show Buzz Aldrin would be illuminated as in the original photograph.
And of course, NVIDIA does not make graphic cards for NASA. They can't be bothered. They canceled their contract. Fried a whole bunch of them up when they were testing it, couldn't figure out what the problem was. Radiation was destroying their hardware, so they just couldn't be bothered to correct it, so they just canceled it. There's PDFs available online that you can look up and check out why.
This is part of the whole exercise in examining the Apollo record. There's the difference between those two hatchways.
Yeah, well, that one's all the way to the back of the door when it's open.
Yep.
The left-hand side. The light goes all the way in down the door. Right past Buzz. That couldn't happen even with reflectivity because the egress mesa is a solid piece of material there. It couldn't shine back up into that.
Yeah. It looks very much like a light, a diffused light. Not diffused by Armstrong, diffused by the set dresser who created it. So all the discussions that we have, all the films that Robert has created so brilliantly, all of these things, it all comes back to people will deny any of this is real. They'll find all sorts of reasons to say, oh, you're wrong, this is why. Come up with reasons, quite spurious reasons usually.
You can't deny this. Even the NVIDIA one with the sun itself, The sun should be a single point of light in the sky.
It should be.
And if it was shot through a lens, then there'd be a little bit of lens reflection from it.
Yeah.
But it's showing a full diffusion of light, and diffusion of light only occurs in an atmosphere.
Exactly.
It claims that it's a diffusion of light is also claiming that it was shot in an atmosphere, which means it was shot here on Earth, because this is the only planet that we know of that has an atmosphere of this nature.
There is so much wrong with this photograph that people who agree that NASA have landed men on the moon, which I don't count myself amongst them, but people who go along with NASA's story will not consider any of this information, because if they did and agreed with what we have concluded, that it was all filmed here on Earth, they would then have to make another decision. What else have they been lied to about? And that they cannot confront, that they cannot accept.
There's one other point here I'd like to point out. Apollo 12 has this beautiful antenna sitting outside of it, and 14 does, and the rest of them have this very large high gain antenna out there. And obviously they needed that to communicate with. How come Apollo 11 doesn't have one?
Good point. Were they communicating through this S-band
That's
antenna?
not pointing at anything.
That's not pointing at Earth.
And Apollo 12 is just pointing to the ground. But Apollo 11 does not have a high gain antenna, and you need that to do a television transmission.
Yes, of course you do. You have to make sure that that antenna is pointing in the correct direction, because from the moon, the Earth will only extend or subtend 2 degrees. That's the width of the Earth when viewed from the moon, 2 degrees. 2 degrees is not a particularly wide angle.
That's 2 arc seconds, is it not? Not 2 degrees, it's 2 arc seconds. You'd have to get out there and set it up and then call the guy.
It has to be line of sight. i.e., from the moon, it has to see the Earth. Not necessarily the receiving dish. There were 3 of them for Apollo. There was one in Australia, Parkes. There was one in California, Goldston. And there was one in Madrid.
Yeah.
They were tracking it enough distance apart, no matter how the Earth rotated. They would always have one that could pick up signals from the moon. But from the moon, you have to direct your signal on a 2-degree angle. It's quite small. So there are so many anomalies that we can identify. It's almost boring to have to do it, because we can just go on forever. In 2021, they admit that radiation is a problem. It hasn't been solved. How did they solve it in Apollo? It's the same radiation, doesn't change. And I think we're going to see Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, maybe Richard Branson discover this for themselves. I hope they will protect themselves from the radiation in space. Otherwise they will go out, but they won't come back. Or they'll come back seriously incapacitated.
I think for the moment they're just happy to have their little roller coaster ride up and down. Puts on a nice show, gives them attention,
Yeah.
gets people to invest in them.
That roller coaster ride, as you describe it, the rocket that Richard Branson went up in, and that Jeff Bezos has just gone up in, they only went up as far as Alan Shepard did 60 years ago. So they've got a bit of a way to go yet. Maybe it was a more comfortable ride, maybe it had better facilities, but it wasn't very far. They've got a long way to go, and I hope they're going to be looking at the Apollo record to find answers to the questions they're going to have, is how do we protect our crew against the radiation in space? I hope they go to NASA and say, how did you do it, guys? Because obviously you did. 24 people were flown to the moon and back.
Yeah.
How did you do it? Because we'd like to be able to do it ourselves.
The problem is if you're teaching school children that all of this happened is for real, and they get into science and engineering and stuff like that and find out that the only thing they're working on is trying to figure out how to actually do this, it's really going to confuse them, and it might just turn them right off. They might just change directions and say, I'm not going to work on this.
Yep.
Because they'll start asking questions like we are.
And young people today are far more informed if they're interested in a subject like this. because they can use computers, they can go online, they can find out information. It's not a good look.
No.
NASA are now holding back the education of the next generation by refusing to admit their fraud, their deception, which was a political event. It worked very well. Compared to other conspiracy-type views, this was a relatively benign one. I hope we've explained it and people appreciate what we have identified and explained. And if you don't like what we said, I'm sorry. Tell us where we've gone wrong. Tell us how we've made incorrect assumption. Just look at this picture here and explain it. Compared to this picture here and explain it.
Yeah.
They're very different.